We like to believe that comfort is a modern invention, that before electricity, central heating, and insulation, people simply endured the cold, huddled around fires, freezing through winters that would cripple us today. But that story is wrong. Centuries ago, people lived through winters colder than anything most of us will ever experience, without power, without gas, without thermostats, and they did it inside homes that stayed warm, dry, and livable for months at a time. Not because they burned more fuel, because they understood heat. In medieval Europe, homes weren't heated by brute force. They were designed to trap, store, and recycle warmth with astonishing efficiency. Fires burned for a few hours, not all day, yet the heat lingered through the night. Walls absorbed warmth, floors radiated it back. Even the ground itself became part of the heating system. Meanwhile, today's homes lose heat the moment the furnace shuts off. A blackout in winter can make a modern house uninhabitable in hours. So how did people centuries ago stay warm with nothing but wood, stone, and earth? The answer isn't primitive ingenuity, it's advanced thermal thinking, methods so effective that many have never been surpassed. Hidden beneath castles, farmhouses, and monasteries were systems designed to trap warmth, regulate airflow, and store heat for days at a time. And most of them have been forgotten. In this episode, we'll uncover 7 medieval heating techniques so effective that modern engineers still study them today. Systems that worked without electricity, without fossil fuels, and without failure. Because the past didn't lack intelligence. It just understood something we forgot. Long before radiators, boilers, or underfloor heating systems, ancient builders had already solved one of the hardest problems in architecture: how to warm an entire structure evenly without filling it with smoke. The solution was the hypocaust, a system so effective that versions of it are still studied by engineers today. Developed by the Romans and later refined throughout medieval Europe, the hypocaust worked by raising the floor of a building on short stone pillars. Beneath this elevated floor was an open chamber connected to a furnace. When a fire was lit, hot air and smoke were drawn through this space, circulating under the entire building before escaping through flues embedded in the walls. The result was radiant heat from below, warm floors, evenly heated rooms, and no smoke inside the living space. This wasn't crude heating, it was controlled, efficient, and remarkably sophisticated. The key wasn't fire itself, it was thermal mass. The stone floors and walls absorbed the heat slowly, storing it long after the flames died down. Hours after the fire was extinguished, the structure continued to radiate warmth. The temperature changed gradually, not suddenly. Compare that to modern forced air systems. When the furnace shuts off, warmth vanishes almost immediately. Rooms cool unevenly. Drafts form. The system depends entirely on continuous energy input. The hypocaust didn't. It turned fuel into stored heat, not fleeting warmth. Entire bath complexes, villas, and fortified residences relied on this system. And it wasn't reserved for emperors. Variations of it appeared in monasteries, communal halls, and rural dwellings across Europe. What's remarkable is that this wasn't lost technology, it was abandoned. As construction shifted towards speed and cost-cutting, systems that required planning, masonry, and patience were replaced by ones that favored immediacy. But the lesson remains. The most effective heating systems aren't the ones that blow hot air. They're the ones that hold heat. Long before radiators and furnaces, heat came from a single source: the hearth. But this wasn't just a fireplace. It was the heart of the house, architecturally, thermally, and socially. In medieval homes, the hearth was placed deliberately at the center of the structure. Not for symbolism, but for physics. Heat radiated outward evenly in all directions, warming thick walls, floors, and even the air trapped within the building's mass. The goal wasn't to heat the air, it was to heat the structure itself. Stone and clay absorbed the fire's energy throughout the day. At night, when the flames died down, that stored warmth radiated back slowly, keeping the interior livable until morning. The fire didn't need to burn constantly. It needed to burn strategically. Smoke was not allowed to stagnate. Early chimneys and flues were carefully designed to pull smoke upward while still retaining heat. The chimney wasn't just an exhaust, it was part of the heating system. As hot gases rose, they warmed the surrounding masonry, turning vertical shafts into thermal reservoirs. This is why ancient hearths were massive, not for spectacle, but for efficiency. Modern fireplaces, by contrast, are decorative. They draw heated air out of the room and send it straight up the chimney. In many homes, lighting a fire actually makes the room colder. Medieval builders understood this instinctively. They shaped hearths to radiate heat inward, not lose it upward. Walls around the fire were thick and often curved, reflecting warmth back into the living space. Fire wasn't a feature, it was an integrated system. And once again, the lesson is clear. Ancient builders didn't rely on constant fuel. They relied on smart design that stored heat and released it slowly. That principle, store, don't waste, defined everything that came next. Medieval builders understood something modern construction forgot. Walls aren't just boundaries. They are energy systems. A stone or earth wall wasn't meant to separate inside from outside. It was meant to buffer the environment, to absorb heat when it was available and release it slowly when it wasn't. That's why medieval walls were massive. Not 6 inches thick, not framed with hollow cavities, often 3 to 6 feet thick, built from stone, clay, rubble, and lime mortar. This wasn't excess, it was engineering. During the day, as fires burned or sunlight warmed the exterior, the outer layers of the wall absorbed heat. That warmth migrated inward at a slow, predictable rate. By the time night arrived and temperatures dropped, the heat reached the interior surface and radiated gently into the living space. It worked in reverse during summer. The thick walls absorbed daytime heat, preventing it from reaching the interior until late evening, when outdoor temperatures dropped and the stored heat could dissipate harmlessly. This phenomenon is called thermal lag, and medieval builders mastered it centuries before the term existed. Modern walls, by contrast, are designed for speed, not stability. Thin framing, synthetic insulation, and air gaps prioritize short-term insulation values over long-term thermal balance. They stop heat from moving, but they don't store it. That's why modern homes experience sharp temperature swings. When the heat turns off, warmth vanishes. When the sun hits the walls, interiors overheat. Medieval walls smoothed those extremes. They created thermal inertia. The result was comfort without constant energy input. And it wasn't accidental. Builders chose stone types carefully. Dense limestone held heat. Porous volcanic rock regulated moisture. Clay-rich soils moderated temperature swings. Every material had a role. The building itself became a thermal engine, one that required no electricity, no mechanical parts, and no fuel beyond the initial fire. That's not primitive thinking. That's systems engineering. If the walls were the body of a medieval home, the roof was its skin. And unlike modern roofs, thin, rigid, and fragile, medieval roofs were alive with function. In Northern Europe, especially Scandinavia and Iceland, builders layered roofs with thick sod, soil, and turf laid over wooden beams and birch bark. This wasn't decorative. It was one of the most advanced thermal systems ever devised. A turf roof could be several feet thick. That mass acted like insulation, and thermal storage all at once. In winter, it trapped heat rising from below. In summer, it blocked solar radiation before it could penetrate the living space. But its true genius lay in moisture control. Modern roofs try to exclude water entirely. When that barrier fails, and it always does, moisture becomes trapped, leading to rot, mold, and structural failure. Turf roofs worked differently. They absorbed moisture, held it temporarily, and then released it slowly through evaporation. Rain didn't rot the structure, it fed it. The living layer of grass and soil regulated humidity naturally, preventing condensation inside the house. Snow, too, became an ally. A layer of snow acted as additional insulation, trapping warm air below while shielding the roof from wind. A heavy snowfall actually made the house warmer. The weight of the sod compressed the layers beneath, sealing gaps and preventing drafts. Instead of fighting gravity and weather, the structure used them. And because the roof was alive, literally, it repaired itself. Grass roots held the soil together. Moss sealed cracks. The system regenerated year after year. Modern roofing systems, by contrast, are disposable. Shingles crack, membranes degrade. Repairs are constant and costly. The medieval roof didn't need maintenance contracts. It needed time. It worked because it wasn't designed to resist nature. It was designed to collaborate with it. One of the most overlooked medieval heating breakthroughs wasn't about making heat. It was about moving it intelligently. Long before radiators, boilers, or forced air systems, medieval builders designed homes where heat traveled naturally, without fans, pumps, or fuel waste. The simplest version was the central hearth, placed deliberately at the lowest point of the living space. Heat rises. Medieval builders understood this intuitively. By placing the fire low and central, warmth moved upward and outward, bathing the entire structure evenly. But in more advanced medieval buildings, monasteries, manor houses, bathhouses, the system became even more refined. Stone floors and thick masonry walls acted as thermal highways. When a fire burned for a few hours, heat soaked into stone and brick. Once absorbed, it moved slowly through the structure, radiating warmth long after the fire was extinguished. Some castles and abbeys used primitive hypocaust-style systems, inspired by Roman engineering but adapted for colder climates. Fires burned in external chambers. Warm air and smoke were routed through stone channels beneath floors or behind walls before venting outside. The key difference from modern systems? There were no moving parts, no single failure point, no motors, no dependency on continuous fuel input. Once charged with heat, the building itself became the heater. Compare this to modern forced air systems. Hot air is produced, blown rapidly through ducts, then immediately lost the moment the system shuts down. Walls stay cold. Floors stay cold. The structure never stores energy, it just passes it through. Medieval systems treated heat like water in a reservoir. You filled it slowly, you released it gradually, and nothing was wasted. Even the smoke played a role. Instead of being expelled immediately, it traveled long paths through stone, surrendering heat before exiting. Efficiency wasn't calculated with equations, it was learned by observation, and perfected through generations of survival. These buildings didn't need constant fire. They needed understanding. Modern buildings are designed for speed. Heat on, heat off. Instant comfort, instant loss. Medieval buildings operated on an entirely different principle: thermal patience. They were never meant to warm quickly. They were designed to warm slowly and stay warm for an extraordinarily long time. This distinction changes everything. In a medieval home, the goal was not to heat air. Air was considered unreliable. It escaped too easily. Instead, builders focused on heating mass: stone, earth, clay, and wood. Materials that could absorb energy, store it, and release it gradually over hours or even days. A single fire lit for a few hours in the evening wasn't meant to create immediate comfort. It was meant to charge the structure itself. Walls absorbed warmth like batteries. Floors held heat beneath the feet. Even furniture made from thick timber slowly radiated stored warmth long after the fire died. This is why medieval homes often felt warmer at dawn than they did when the fire was first lit. Modern heating systems invert this logic. They flood the air with hot air, which rises, escapes, and cools almost instantly. Once the furnace shuts off, the temperature drops. The structure itself remains cold, acting as a heat sink rather than a heat source. Ancient builders understood that air is the worst place to store heat. They designed homes that functioned like thermal flywheels. Slow to warm, slow to cool, incredibly stable. This is also why medieval homes rarely experienced the dramatic temperature swings common in modern buildings. The walls buffered extremes. The interior stayed steady, calm, predictable. It wasn't about comfort in the modern sense. It was about survivability. In climates where one cold night could mean death, consistency mattered more than convenience. Thermal patience wasn't a luxury. It was survival intelligence refined over centuries. And once you understand that principle, modern heating suddenly looks less advanced and more fragile. If you could slice a modern house in half and look inside the walls, you'd see the real problem immediately. Empty space. Modern construction relies on cavities, hollow voids stuffed with insulation, wires, ducts, and pipes. These cavities are supposed to trap air and slow heat loss. But in practice, they do the opposite. Air moves, air leaks, air escapes. Every electrical outlet, every joint between materials, every nail hole becomes a pathway for heat to escape. Even airtight homes leak constantly through pressure differences created by wind, temperature changes, and mechanical ventilation. The result is a building that constantly bleeds energy. Medieval buildings had no such cavities. Their walls were solid. Stone, earth, lime, timber, packed tightly together. There was nowhere for air to move, and nowhere for heat to slip through unnoticed. Instead of fighting air movement, medieval builders eliminated it, and that made all the difference. In a turf house or stone longhouse, heat didn't rush toward cold gaps. It diffused slowly through dense material. Thermal energy traveled inch by inch, not in gusts. The structure itself acted as a buffer zone between the interior and the outside world. This is why medieval buildings often felt quiet inside. No drafts, no cold spots, no sudden temperature swings. Even windstorms couldn't strip heat away because the walls were too massive to respond quickly. They absorbed the shock and released it gradually. Modern homes, by contrast, behave like tents wrapped in plastic. They depend entirely on continuous energy input to maintain comfort. The moment that energy stops, the building reveals how fragile it really is. The irony is painful. We use advanced materials to achieve performance medieval builders achieved with dirt, stone, and patience. They didn't fight physics, they partnered with it. And that made all the difference. Modern construction loves to boast about innovation. Stronger concrete, lighter steel, smarter composites. But strength alone was never the secret to durability. Medieval builders understood something modern engineering often ignores. Materials don't just need strength, they need compatibility. Stone, earth, timber, and lime were chosen not because they were the strongest materials available, but because they worked together. Each expanded and contracted at similar rates. Each responded predictably to temperature and moisture. When stress appeared, it was shared, not concentrated. Modern materials don't behave this way. Concrete expands and contracts at a different rate than steel. Synthetic insulation behaves differently than wood. Plastic vapor barriers trap moisture that natural materials once released. When these mismatched materials are locked together, stress builds silently, until something fails. That's why modern buildings crack, warp, and rot from the inside out. Medieval builders avoided this by using materials that aged together. Lime mortar was intentionally weaker than stone, so it would crack first, and could be repaired easily. Wood joints were designed to move. Nothing was rigid. Everything was forgiving. This philosophy created buildings that adapted rather than resisted. Another forgotten principle was repairability. Medieval structures weren't meant to be perfect forever. They were meant to be maintained. A damaged stone could be replaced. A section of mortar could be repacked. Repairs were small, localized, and expected. Modern buildings are the opposite. When a wall fails, entire sections must be torn out. Materials are glued, bonded, or sealed in ways that prevent selective repair. One failure cascades into many. Durability isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking gracefully and being easy to fix. That's the philosophy we lost. And it's one of the reasons medieval buildings still stand while modern ones age prematurely. One of the most misunderstood features of medieval heating wasn't the fire itself. It was how heat moved through the building. Medieval builders didn't try to heat air, they heated mass. Stone floors, thick walls, and masonry benches were not decorative. They were thermal storage systems. When a fire burned, heat didn't rush out a chimney and vanish. It soaked into the surrounding materials, slowly, deeply, and evenly. This is the principle behind hypocaust systems, one of the most advanced heating technologies ever developed before electricity. Originally perfected by the Romans and later adapted across Europe, hypocausts used flues beneath floors and inside walls to circulate warm air from a single fire. The heat traveled through masonry channels, warming stone floors and walls from the inside out. What made this revolutionary wasn't the temperature, it was the stability. Once the stone mass warmed, it radiated heat for hours or even days after the fire went out. No drafts, no cold corners, no temperature swings. The building itself became a thermal battery. Medieval monasteries, castles, and bathhouses used variations of this system. Even simpler homes used thick stone hearths, masonry benches, and heated walls positioned near sleeping areas. The goal was never to heat the air, it was to heat the structure. Modern heating systems do the opposite. They blast hot air into a space, raise the temperature quickly, then shut off. The moment the system stops, the heat disappears. The walls remain cold. The cycle repeats endlessly, burning energy with little lasting effect. Medieval builders understood something subtle but powerful. Warm walls make warm people. When surrounding surfaces radiate heat, your body feels warm even at lower air temperatures. That's why a stone hearth can warm a room more effectively than a furnace blasting hot air. This principle still exists in radiant floor heating today, one of the few modern systems that mirrors ancient logic. But even then, we often pair it with lightweight construction that bleeds heat away. The medieval approach was holistic. Heating wasn't a device, it was embedded into the structure itself. The result? Stable temperatures, minimal fuel use, and buildings that stayed warm long after the fire went out. And this leads to the final lesson, the one that ties everything together. When you step back and look at everything medieval builders understood, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. They didn't build to fight nature, they built to work with it. They understood that heat moves, moisture moves, and materials age. Instead of resisting those forces, they designed systems that cooperated with them. Stone stored warmth, earth regulated humidity, thick walls slowed time itself. Modern construction, by contrast, is built on resistance. We fight heat with insulation. We fight moisture with plastic barriers. We fight cold with machines that burn fuel non-stop. And when those systems fail, when the power goes out or materials degrade, the entire structure collapses into discomfort. That's not resilience, that's dependence. The medieval approach created buildings that didn't panic when conditions changed. They adapted, they buffered, they endured. These structures weren't efficient in the modern sense, they were forgiving. And that's why so many of them are still standing centuries later. This doesn't mean we should abandon technology or live in turf huts again. It means we should relearn the principles our ancestors already solved. Use mass to stabilize temperature. Build with materials that breathe. Design for slow change, not instant comfort. Let structures store energy, not just block it. Respect climate instead of fighting it. Modern architecture is starting to rediscover this. Passive houses, Earth-sheltered homes, rammed earth walls, radiant floors, all of them echo ideas that medieval builders mastered without blueprints or simulations. The future of housing isn't high-tech gadgets layered onto fragile shells. It's intelligent simplicity. It's materials that work with physics, not against it. It's homes that keep you warm, not because they burn energy non-stop, but because they were built to hold it. The medieval world didn't survive brutal winters by accident. They survived because they understood something we're only beginning to remember. If this changed the way you think about buildings, energy, or history, hit subscribe, because the past still holds the answers we're desperately trying to reinvent.